Hello, in this video we will be creating a Gatsby source plugin for the Tracking More API. Tracking More is one of the leading e-commerce tracking solutions out there. They have support for hundreds of different carriers. Tracking More gives you the ability to enter a tracking number and get all of the details about that tracking and that shipment. They have support for different carriers all over the world, and they automatically detect which carrier is which based on the tracking ID. As you can see here, they have an API that shows all of the different carriers that are available. And what we'll do in our Gatsby plugin is we'll transfer all the information from this endpoint into Gatsby local nodes. And we'll also use Gatsby image to render those images and build them statically. So inside of our code editor, let's go ahead and create a package JSON. We're going to create a yarn workspace, and by default, let's go ahead and just create the workspaces for demo and Gatsby source Tracking More. Next, let's add some scripts, and we'll need those in the next step. Let's create a new file inside of the Gatsby source Tracking More folder, and we'll just call this index.js. Every Gatsby plugin needs this, but we can just leave this blank for now. Next, we'll create a new file, and we'll call this package.json, and we'll give it a name, and we'll call this Gatsby source Tracking More. And this links to the root yarn workspace Gatsby source Tracking More that we defined previously. We'll set a version. It's not important right now, but we'll just set a default version here. You can go ahead and add some dependencies or a description or others, but let's use the yarn workspace tool to add our dependencies. And we'll add two dependencies to this project using the yarn workspace CLI. We'll add isomorphic unfetch and the Gatsby source file system. Inside of Gatsby source Tracking More, let's create a new file called Gatsby node. Let's first start by importing our fetch library. We'll call this fetch, and we'll require the isomorphic unfetch package that we installed previously. Next, we'll hook into the Gatsby methods, and we'll export to the source nodes API, and we'll return an asynchronous function. From this function, we'll destructure create node, and we'll destructure create content digest. Then we'll import the create node ID function, and lastly, the reporter logger function. As a second argument passed to the source nodes function, we have the plugin options. And here we're going to destructure the API key. Everything can be found on the Gatsby docs by searching the function, and we can find out what is required and what is passed to that function through reading the documentation. Now we must pass along an API key, so if there isn't one provided, let's go ahead and use the reporter logger, and we'll use the panic function to just output to the terminal that there's been an error. And here we can provide an explicit error, and we can say you must provide your Tracking More API key. Next, let's go ahead and actually make a request. And if we have a look at the URL for the API at Tracking More, we can see that the URL here is api.trackingmore.com/v2/carriers. And if we pass this to the fetch function, and as a second argument, we can pass in an object containing our headers. And importantly, we must pass along that authorization header and the content API type. We can see the header must be Tracking More API key, and we can just pass along that API key. Next, let's go ahead and convert the response to JSON, and we can just call response.json and call that function. However, if the request is not okay, let's go ahead and throw an error, and we'll catch everything that's in that JSON response. Typically, this would be a response that comes from the API whenever it's not a 200 okay. Next, we can see data is provided to us in the response from Tracking More. So let's go ahead and destructure data from JSON, and we'll rename data to carriers so the context makes sense when we're writing the rest of this function. Next, let's go ahead and create a function called process carrier. And what this does is an asynchronous function that takes in a few arguments. Next, let's go ahead and create a function for process carrier that takes in our carrier, and it returns simply an object, but it spreads in all of the current carrier information, but then it will create an ID. And if we have a look on the Track and More site, let's go ahead and use code to distinguish the different IDs for the node here. So all this is doing here is telling Gatsby to create an ID using the carrier code. And we'll pass a few things here, such as the internal type name, and this is what's used to us when we're querying Gatsby. We can see exactly what the type name is called. And lastly, we'll create a content digest for this, and Gatsby has a nice function, and we can just pass along all of the carrier information. Now, believe it or not, this is pretty much all you need to do. Next, all we're going to do is we are going to await each of our carriers, calling the process carrier function, and we can do this using promise.all. We'll map over each of our carriers, we'll grab the current carrier, and we'll tell Gatsby to create a new node, and the actual response for the node will be what is returned to us inside of the process carrier function. Next, let's go ahead and create a demo so we can actually see this working. So inside of the folder demo, create a package JSON. And we'll have to give this a name demo so it matches the yarn workspace name demo that we created at the very beginning. We'll set this to private and we'll create some scripts as well. And those scripts are the exact same scripts that are required and used in the root package JSON. When those have installed, let's create a new file.
Now we have
inside
those
the
scripts.
demo directory.
Now let's use
we'll call
our
this
demo
Gatsby
workspace
config.
and add some
Now we've installed the
dependencies.
Tracking More
We'll add
package.
Gatsby,
So next we just
React,
need to tell Gatsby
React
to use
DOM,
this plugin.
and the
So
important
inside of the
Gatsby source
config
tracking
file,
more.
we'll just return an object which will include a key called plugins, and this key will resolve to an array of different plugins that we can use, and the one that we want to get started with is the Gatsby source Tracking More. We're resolving the package name, and we're also passing along some options. Now, the option we know we need is the API key, and if you sign into Tracking More, you can go ahead and get that API key. So we can see here the options, that API key is passed directly to the source node's function as a second argument. Inside of the settings of Tracking More, you can create a new API key, and it's this that we'll need to add to the options object, and I would recommend not to publish this to source control, but use something like an environment variable in a real-world application. Next, let's go ahead and run yarn dev, and if we head to localhost 8000 and we go to the graphical interface, you can see on the left-hand side inside of the GraphQL Explorer, we can see we now have all Tracking More carrier, and this is an automatically generated query based off those nodes that we created previously. And you can see we get everything that we had from the Tracking More API when we made the request in Postman. This is now all inside of Gatsby. This is awesome. And for free, we get access to the limit filters and various other filters that come out of the box with Gatsby. So this is an amazing achievement, what we've created so far. We now have all of these nodes being automatically generated for us inside of the Gatsby at build time, and we have all of that data ready to use inside our application. Now we are not done just yet. What we're now going to do is take all of the images or the picture from Tracking More, and we're going to create a local node for this. So what we'll do is we'll hook into the onCreateNode API, and we will return an asynchronous function. We'll destructure a few things like we did previously, including the actions and the create node from that actions object, and then things like the node store cache and some others. Then inside of this function, let's check that the current type that we are in, the current node, is of type Tracking More carrier, and there is actually a picture URL. We don't want to try and create a node if there's no picture URL. Now, we don't actually have that picture URL, so what we're going to do is we're going to change the way process carrier works a little, and we're going to destructure picture, and then we're going to spread everything into carrier from that object, and then we're going to assign picture URL to picture. So now inside of our onCreate node function, we can simply make a const for our picture node, and then inside of a try catch block, we can actually call a new function. And we will destructure from the response the ID, and we'll call the function create remote file node, and this is imported from the Gatsby source file system package. This function takes a few things, the first important one being the actual URL, and in this case this will be the node.picture URL. And we can see here the URL starts with a // so the remote file node creator isn't actually going to work with this out of the box, so why don't we replace that, and we'll just replace it with http://. Then finally let's link the node to its parent node, and then we'll send in the cache and a few of the other functions we imported. If this works, we want to assign picture node to that ID, so Gatsby knows where to look when it's building these nodes, and it can kind of reference each other with the IDs. We'll catch any error by using the reporter, and we'll call the log function, and we'll prefix our log with the actual package name, so it's easier to see which package is causing an error. And we'll simply just say there is no picture at the URL that we have. Then let's do node picture _node as the picture node. And this is how we link the two things together in Gatsby. Then let's run yarn dev and let's see what goes on. And we should see the results. There are a few of the track and more carriers that do not have any of the pictures. Now if we open the graphical interface once again, you should now see that picture is not just a URL, but it's now an object, and it contains all of the information about that node, including things like the URL and its extension and anything else you want to get. We have it there. Now we'll need to install a few dependencies into the demo workspace, and these will be the Gatsby image component itself, Gatsby plugin sharp, and Gatsby transformer sharp. And these allow us to do some really cool things on the demo and on the front end. Now inside of the demo folder, let's create a new folder and file, source pages and index.js. And inside of index.js, we'll import React, we'll import GraphQL, and use static query from Gatsby. And then we'll import Gatsby image as an image. And we'll write a query. This query will be the same as what we did inside of the graphical playground, and we'll just get all of the track and more carriers. We'll paste that query in and we'll change a few things, and for the sake of this demo we don't really need anything other than the picture. But because we changed the way that the picture is structured, this is now a Gatsby image. This is now a local file node, so we can use the child image sharp fragments, and we can read all about those on the docs. If you'd like to create different queries, you can of course browse the docs and find out all the different arguments and fragments that are available for Gatsby image. Finally, we'll create the actual page itself, so we'll create a function index page, and then we'll destructure carriers from the query that we created above. And we'll invoke this query using use static query, and then we'll simply return the carriers on the page. So let's just add a simple heading for the page inside of our React fragment, and then we'll iterate through every single one of the all tracking more carrier nodes, and then we will use the image component from Gatsby image. Now we'll invoke the image component, and we'll set the fluid prop to be the fluid query that we have inside of our fragment, and then we will set a style, and we'll just set a fixed width for the purposes of this demo. We'll also include the name so it's easy to see which is which, and then all we need to do is export that index page as the default. Before we forget, let's alias the query with carriers for all tracking more carrier. Then lastly, inside of the Gatsby config, let's add the two remaining plugins we need to instantiate, and these are the Gatsby plugin Sharp and the Gatsby transformer Sharp. Then if we clean all of our Gatsby cache and the public folder, we'll run yarn dev once again, and if we head to localhost 8000, we should see that we have a list of all of the different carriers and their image. We can see in the terminal here that it is generating the imaged thumbnails, and these are the thumbnails that will be used by the Gatsby image component. Now we can see at localhost 8000 our list of different carriers and their image, or picture. If we refresh, we can see there is a slight blur, and that is the Gatsby image component doing its magic. So we're now ready to publish this package to NPM so others can make use of it. And let's do a few things here, such as adding a license so people can actually use this, and add a description so when people install this from NPM, they can see it when they're browsing the registry. They can see what this plugin actually does, and you can specify whatever you like here in your plugin so others can know what it is and what it does. We also need to specify some keywords, and this is important if you want the Gatsby plugin to appear on the Gatsby plugins directory. So we'll have to include Gatsby and Gatsby-plugin, and then some other keywords that relate to this plugin. Now I'm going to be using semantic release to automatically deploy and pick up any changes based on semantic versioning. So semantic release will automatically and fully release the builds and everything you do with your plugin, and we'll use GitHub Actions to handle all of this CI/CD for you. So inside of your root directory, let's create a folder .github/workflows, and then we will create the file release.yml. You just need to insert some of the content here, and then you can specify your GitHub token and NPM token. And finally, we'll run that npx semantic release. Inside of the root package JSON, we'll need to tell the semantic release watcher basically where to look for our package. So we're just specifying the package root Gatsby source tracking mall. Then inside of the Gatsby source tracking mall, we'll create a README, so anyone that is installing this or finding this on the NPM registry can see the actual README for this NPM module. And this is important for anyone looking to use the package, how they can actually see how to install this. So it's very easy. We tell them they need to run yarn add and then the name of the package. And then we have some simple usage instructions, which simply tell them to do what we did inside of our demo folder, which was just to include the package inside of the Gatsby config. I'm going to go ahead and initialize a new Git repo, and I'm using the hub CLI to create a new directory and a new repository on my GitHub. So it's github.com/notrab and the name of the file that I created. We can see on GitHub here, it's just an empty directory for now. And if we head to the settings, what we'll need to do before we deploy it is head to the secrets and add a secret for our NPM token. And inside of NPM, if we go to the auth tokens from the dropdown and we click to create a new token, we can simply create a token and copy and paste that into GitHub, and that token will be available through that GitHub action. Now that's added, all that is left to do is create a new file, .gitignore, and we'll add a few folders in here and a few files that we want to be ignored, so these aren't pushed to NPM or to GitHub. So I'm just going to commit everything here, and we're just going to call this feat. And this feat is the important part of semantic release. It's going to pick that this is a feature, and then it's going to use the semver semantic versioning, and it will release this as a 1.0.0.
Now if we head to GitHub, once that's pushed and we head to the release tab, you should see our commit message. And if we open that and click release on the side, we should see the actual workflow and the current progress of that GitHub action. Then we should see, after a few minutes, that everything was completed and that it was successful. And if we search the NPM registry, we should now see successfully our NPM module. We can also see in unpackage, we actually just have the files inside of that Gatsby folder. Nothing else was published, such as the demo. Then all that's left to do is head to the Gatsby website, and we can also search there and we can see the plugin show up there as well.